Every year, a think tank in London called Legatum produces a huge doorstop of a report. They launch it amid a flurry of free drinks for journalists. I've been one of them. The report is called the Prosperity Index, and it rates the quality of life for the citizens of 167 countries. Britain does well, underlining why 5,600 migrants have risked life and limb to get here in small boats so far this year alone. But other countries are stuck near the drop zone of this global league table. Rwanda, for instance, is 123rd when it comes to personal safety. Unsurprising, given the recent history of this landlocked African republic, which saw anything up to 1 million people killed in the genocide of the early 1990s. Not a place, then, likely to act as a magnet for the huddled masses. But it is a country which last month signed a memorandum of understanding with Denmark. You can call it up online. 14 legal articles, and this being a Scandinavian country, they're even helpfully written in English. The Danish are, depending on your tastes, following the hardest of hard lines on illegal immigration, or dreaming up imaginative solutions to an intractable problem. The memorandum allows the Danes to assess the validity of asylum claims offshore. In other words, illegal migrants who make it to Copenhagen might find themselves on planes bound for a processing camp in Kigali, theoretically at least. Something similar was tried by Tony Abbott when he was Australia's Prime Minister. Last week, when I interviewed him on GBNews, he summed up his policy with the directness for which he's known. If you come the wrong way, you must not, he said, be allowed to stay. Australia was condemned by human rights groups when it sent migrants to holding centres in Papua New Guinea, but Abbott reasoned that if you made it clear, painfully clear, to would-be asylum seekers that any attempt to enter Oz would end up in a steamy camp hundreds of miles away from Australia, lives would actually be saved as a result, because over time, fewer people would attempt the hazardous journey. Broadly speaking, he was right. Numbers plummeted. And today, The Times reported that Priti Patel has opened talks with the Danes to share their processing operation. It's a measure of her frustration. Talks with France about migrants being processed in safe EU countries have run into the sand. When the idea of using a British territory like Ascension was floated a few months ago, people scoffed. But opinion polls consistently show support for tougher measures. Nobody, however, predicted that a potential solution to the problems of the Kent coast could be found in the heart of Africa. Well, the former Brexit Party leader and GBNews contributor Nigel Farage joins us now, along with our political correspondent Tom Harwood, who never went away. Nigel Farage, to you first. What do you make of this scheme?
Well, it's a very good day to be asking me this, Colin, because I've been on the Kent coast today. I found a boat abandoned on a stretch of shingle, and I saw the police conducting a manhunt where 20 people who'd landed disappeared. And then later on, I watched the Dungeness lifeboat come in with another group of 20 people. I just missed 45 who'd landed down at Camber Sands on one of the new 11-metre boats that are now being moulded and made. Haven't got the numbers for today in total, at least 200 today. We're headed for 20,000 this year. That's my current prediction for the numbers that will come across the English Channel. Now, here's the point about what the Times said today from Priti Patel. We have seen, since the summer of 2019, our Home Secretary consistently make promise after promise as to how she would stop this problem. You know, we were going to have drones, we were going to have the RAF, we were going to do this, we were going to do that. But the point is, and you referred to Tony Abbott a moment ago. Now, Tony's a good friend of mine. He started off with the offshore processing centres, but in the end he decided even that wasn't the way to solve it. In the end, what Abbott did, the boats were coming from Indonesia, and the Australian Navy put them under tow and towed them back to Indonesia. Nearly every one of these vessels coming into the UK is actually being escorted by the French Navy until it gets across the line into British waters, whereupon Border Force and our magnificent RNLI then act as a taxi service. Can you imagine, once you've accepted people in, and given that despite Brexit, we're still part of the European Convention on Human Rights, there is no legal way we're going to be able to deport people to Rwanda or anywhere else. And once again, it's Priti Patel making promises that she can't deliver, cheering up the backbenchers, getting, a Tory party conference into rapturous applause. And I have to say, Priti Patel on this issue, once again, pretty useless.
Tom, Priti Patel, it seems to some people, is buying time. The truth is she can't make the French bend to the UK state's will on this. Pursuing, for instance, Nigel Farage's idea of towing boats back across the English Channel to French ports, it's a non-starter.
Well, I think this is the crucial context within which we're discussing this. I mean, the UK has been trying to have these negotiations with France, and they don't seem to have been getting anywhere at all. The UK government being able to say, well, hang on, if we don't talk to France, we've got friends over here in Denmark who we can talk to, friends even in Rwanda who we can talk to. Perhaps that puts greater pressure on negotiations with France. After all, we know that there's no way you can get a good deal if you're not willing to walk away. That certainly is a lesson over the last few years in British politics and British negotiation. So potentially this is more of a tactic than anything concrete and substantial. But I think there's something else that is being missed here, and that's that, of course, you can say that we're going to stop the boats all you like, but people will want to come to this country. It's one of the best countries in the world, and people who are escaping squalor and misery, not only in war zones, but apparently also in northern France, are desperate to come here. So I think that the question is, and Priti Patel did set this out a couple of months ago in when she was trailing her new plan for immigration, is you need more secure legal routes for people to do the right thing, to go through the proper processes and to come here legally and become contributing tax-paying citizens of this country. The problem is if you don't have those legal routes, then people will find other ways to come here. So there's got to be two sides to this coin. Yes, find ways to prevent that treacherous journey and to crack down on those criminal gangs that treat people as commodities, but also open up more legal routes for people to do the right thing.
Nigel Farage, let's just talk about the Danish role in all this, because if you look at the Memorandum of Understanding, it's available online, you can have a look at it. It's clearly a fairly substantive piece of work. It's not window dressing, it's not gimmickry. This seems to be a full-throated attempt to process asylum seekers who end up in Denmark, in Rwanda, not an obvious place to go, but there it is. Is this a sense in which the UK is, climbing on Denmark's bandwagon, but also, and perhaps more importantly, what lessons might there be, for instance, for the Labour Party, when you look at the government in Denmark that's doing this? It's not an obviously traditional Tory government at all. It's of the centre-left, to some degree, a coalition with the Greens, of all people, and they like this idea. There's a lesson there, surely, for Labour if they want to reclaim the Northern Heartlands and the Red Wall.
But Labour can't do that because so much of the Labour Party has now become this new sort of international socialist, we're all citizens of the world type party that they just can't make that jump. Look, Denmark has had much tougher immigration policies than almost any other country in Europe for years and years and years. They do not have a serious problem with illegal immigration anyway. And what they're trying to do with this proposal is to say, don't waste your time. Don't bother. What we do is I've seen dozens of people today coming into this country, nearly all young men between the ages of 18 and 26. And Tom Harwood, I say this to you. If you make legal immigration easier into Britain, remember this. Net migration into Britain is now running at nearly 1/3 every year. The British population has increased by 8 million since the year 2000, and 84% of that is directly down to immigration. We ask ourselves, why is there a housing crisis? Why can't we get kids into primary schools? Much of it is through legal migration to Britain. We don't need to make that any easier. But as far as the illegal route is concerned, most of those that come would never qualify to come into the country legally. Most have no identity documents whatsoever because they have deliberately, willfully thrown them away. They are being put within 24 hours into 4-star hotels up and down the country at a massive cost to this nation. And many will finish up effectively in the modern slave trade. And we should be ashamed that we're allowing this to happen. We have to absolutely tell the French we will no longer accept the French Navy escorting illegal dinghies out of their waters into ours. We are no longer a member of the European Union. will respect the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugee Status, which says you claim that status in the first safe country you come to. So we can deal with the illegal stuff, actually very simply. When it comes to legal migration, let's have a bigger debate about whether our quality of life is better with at least 8 million more people living here in the last 20 years than it was before.
Tom, that's a debate for another time, in a sense, isn't it? But just, I could see you gingerly shaking your head at one point. You can explain why, perhaps. But there's also an abstract case, and I know we were talking about it off air, that there are those people who say, look, actually, in a globalised world, what's wrong with open borders?
Well, I suppose there is one view which is philosophically more consistent, I suppose, than a great popular view in this country that used to be have open borders to 27 European countries but very tight migration controls on the rest of the world. Surely if you're going to have open borders to 27 countries, it's actually fairly discriminatory to not have the same policy to every country in the world. And I think that there is certainly a case, it's not the one that I would necessarily make, that you should have that open border attitude and deliver that complete open flow with no restrictions on people whatsoever. But what I would say with regard to illegal migrants that are costing this country an inordinate amount of money, and indeed refugees being put up in hotels, or asylum seekers, I should say, being put up in hotels, and also statutorily banned from working in this country. Surely the answer there is to create more legal routes for them to become tax-paying, contributing members of society who actually put cash in rather than take cash out. That seems to be a far more sensible way to go about this. And just as for the population size problems, I mean, the United Kingdom's population before the 1800s was about a third that of France. We had the Industrial Revolution. We overtook France in terms of our population. That made us the premier power in the world. Well, that delivered such prosperity for our country, and we can deal. We will be much better to face the problems of the future by having a larger, stronger population.
Now you're taking the long view. We're getting into very deep demographic waters here. Nigel Farage, the last word to you.
These are not refugees. They're not asylum seekers, Tom. They are illegal immigrants into this country. 85% of them are young men between the ages of 18 and 28 who've deserted their home countries. They're not refugees. They are economic migrants pursuing an economic dream. They've deserted their families from their home countries, and many of them will finish up as slaves or working in crime in Britain. We should be ashamed of what we're doing, and let's call it what it is. And frankly, on your last point, you know, the reason that wages have gone down, the reason you can't get your kids into local schools, the reason that NHS waiting lists are what they are, that traffic is what it is that our population has officially risen by 8 million so far since 2020. And the truth is, it's probably more than 10 million. This is about quality of life, and a rise in population as rapid as that due to immigration, frankly, is the political class betraying ordinary people, and so few in London are prepared to call it out.
This is a Malthusian argument. We've had this discussion. The population increases from 1800 to the mid-20th century created enormous wealth and enormous success for this country, and quality of life.
This is not creating wealth.
Gentlemen,
GDP's gone up, but GDP per capita has gone down, and the quality of life cannot be measured in purely economic terms. And that point is why we voted for Brexit in 2016.
But when we start getting into Thomas Malthus, we know we've gone too far. Our brief is purely to talk about Rwanda. Nigel Farage, Tom Harwood, absolute pleasure as always. Thanks very much, Steve, for your time.